He scrubbed the marble floors of the richest firm in the city, unseen by everyone. But one night, he uncovered a secret so dangerous, it could destroy them all and make the invisible man impossible to ignore. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The lobby of Brandel Co. glistened under the fluorescent lights, a cathedral of glass and steel designed to intimidate. Every surface shone polished marble floors, mirrored elevators, chrome handles wiped spotless. That gleam was his work. Isaiah Reed, mop in hand, moved silently across the expanse. He knew every scuff mark, every corner where dust gathered. He knew the firm's heartbeat, the rush of suits in the morning, the clatter of high heels, the low growl of late-night conference calls. And yet, despite knowing the rhythm of this place better than anyone, he was a ghost within it. Executives streamed past without a glance. Some nearly collided with his mop bucket, muttering under their breath as if he had been in the way. Most didn't acknowledge him at all. To them, Isaiah wasn't a man. He was background noise, an extension of the floor he scrubbed. But Isaiah noticed everything. He saw the way junior analysts flinched when the CEO strode through the lobby, phone pressed to his ear, not bothering to look up. He caught fragments of conversations, bonuses whispered like secrets, complaints about mergers, casual arrogance dressed in expensive suits. He'd seen interns cry in the stairwell after being torn apart in meetings, and partners celebrate million-dollar deals with champagne delivered to conference rooms. And he noticed her, Julia Harrington. She wasn't CEO not yet, but she carried herself like one. Sharp navy suits, heels clicking with precision, eyes always locked on her phone. She didn't so much as glance at Isaiah when she passed him, though he knew the scent of her perfume by heart. She had climbed higher, faster than anyone in the firm's history. People both envied and feared her. And to Isaiah, she represented the firm itself. Sleek, ruthless, untouchable. The only person who ever spoke to him was Darren, the night shift security guard. A broad-shouldered man with a laugh too loud for the quiet halls, Darren treated Isaiah with a mix of camaraderie and condescension. "You gonna polish that floor till I can see my future in it?" Darren teased one evening, leaning against his desk at the entrance. Isaiah smirked faintly. "Maybe if you had a brighter future, it'd show up clearer." Darren chuckled, shaking his head. "Careful now. Talk like that, they'll fire you for being visible." Visible. The word sat heavy on Isaiah's chest, because the truth was he had learned to survive by being unseen. Yet, as he pushed his mop across the gleaming lobby that night, something shifted. He couldn't name it, maybe the way Julia's heels clicked sharper than usual, maybe the hushed urgency in the executives' voices as they hurried upstairs, maybe the stack of shredded papers left carelessly near the trash. Something in the air felt wrong. Isaiah paused, leaning on his mop handle, listening. The glass walls echoed with the hum of after-hours activity. A meeting late, tense, unusual. His instincts told him there was a storm brewing above those mirrored elevators. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like just a janitor cleaning up after the powerful. He felt like a witness. But a witness to what? The building was quieter after 10 p.m., when most of the die shift workers had gone home. The hum of the air vents filled the silence, broken only by the occasional ding of an elevator or Darren's muffled laughter at his phone. Isaiah wheeled his cart into the 23rd floor executive level. Usually he saved this floor for last. Not because it was harder work, but because it was heavier. The air up here always felt colder, the offices lined with frosted glass like fish bowls for sharks. Cleaning it meant glimpsing the lives of people who would never notice him. Tonight, though, something was different. The lights were still on in conference room B. He paused, mop bucket sloshing softly as he pushed it to the side. Through the glass he could see them, the CEO, Richard Brandel himself, flanked by 3 senior partners and Julia Harrington. They leaned over a stack of binders, their voices low but urgent. Isaiah shouldn't have stopped. He knew that. His job was to clean, not to notice. not to listen, but he did. "The numbers don't add up," one partner muttered, flipping a page. "If the auditors push, they won't," Brandel snapped. His voice carried authority, final, like the slam of a judge's gavel. "We've handled bigger. The offshore accounts are buried. No one will find them." Isaiah froze. Offshore accounts? Auditors? His pulse quickened. Julia's voice cut in, calm but sharper than the others. "You're gambling too high, Richard. If this leaks, we're not talking about fines. We're talking federal charges." Brandel leaned across the table, eyes like steel. "Which is why it won't leak. Do you understand me?" A silence followed. The kind of silence Isaiah had heard many times, the silence of fear. He forced himself to keep moving, pushing the mop slowly down the hallway as though he hadn't heard a thing. His chest tightened. He shouldn't care. This wasn't his world. Their secrets weren't his problem. And yet, he did care. As he bent to empty a trash bin near the conference room, a folder slipped from the stack inside. It hit the carpet softly, pages sliding out. Instinctively, Isaiah crouched to pick it up, hands steady despite the pounding of his heart. The top sheet caught his eye. Numbers. Accounts. Transfers. Names of shell companies he didn't recognize. But even with just a glance, he understood enough. He had once been a man who dreamed of a career in finance, before life had slammed shut on him. Numbers weren't foreign to him. These weren't mistakes. This was deliberate. He slid the paper back into the folder, set it on the bin, and continued down the hall as though nothing had happened. His face was blank, but inside, a storm had begun. By the time he reached the elevator lobby, he could hear Darren's voice echoing faintly from downstairs. The normalcy of it clashed violently with what Isaiah had just seen. Fraud. Corruption. Millions, maybe billions buried where no one was supposed to look. He leaned against his mop handle, breath shallow. His invisibility had always been a curse. Tonight, it was a weapon. He had seen what no one else was supposed to, and if he chose to act, he could bring an empire crashing down. But if he did, they would see him. And once seen, he could never be invisible again. By the next morning, the atmosphere at Brandel Co. felt off. Isaiah noticed it immediately. He always noticed. The lobby, usually filled with confident chatter and the sharp staccato of heels, buzzed with something quieter. Anxious. Executives moved faster, their greetings clipped, their smiles tighter than usual. Even the receptionists, who usually scrolled through their phones between calls, whispered to each other, glancing nervously toward the elevators. Something had happened after he'd left. Something tied to what he'd overheard. He kept his head down, pushing his mop across the floor, but his ears stayed sharp. Meeting with legal at 9 T. Compliance is sniffing around again. If the press gets wind of this, bits and pieces like shards of glass. Enough to slice through the silence. When the CEO stormed through the lobby, the air seemed to shrink around him. Richard Brandel didn't walk, he cut through space, a force field of authority that bent everyone out of his way. His jaw was clenched, his phone pressed so hard to his ear Isaiah thought it might crack. "Handle it," Brandel barked into the receiver before disappearing into an elevator. Isaiah paused, squeezing water from his mop. He knew what he'd heard last night wasn't just paranoia. This was real. Something was unraveling. Julia Harrington arrived not long after, crisp as always, her stride unbroken. Yet Isaiah noticed the difference, the way she gripped her phone tighter, the flicker of unease in her eyes. For a fraction of a second, she seemed less untouchable. Darren, the security guard, ambled over while Isaiah refilled his bucket. "Whole building's on edge today," he muttered, lowering his voice like they were co-conspirators. "Some memo went out, I think. All hands on deck, code red. You hear anything?" Isaiah shook his head. "Just floors to clean." Darren chuckled, though his eyes narrowed. "Man, you're here later than anyone. If something shady went down, that you saw it first." Isaiah forced a smile but said nothing. Silence was safer. Still, the words stuck. If something shady went down, that you saw it first. Darren wasn't wrong. He had seen more than anyone realized. That was the irony of invisibility, it gave him access. By noon, the tension had thickened. Meetings spilled into hallways, partners hissed in corners, and interns scurried like mice avoiding traps. Isaiah kept moving through it all, blending into the background as he always had. But inside, his mind spun. He couldn't shake the image of the folder, the numbers, the offshore accounts. He thought about the families ruined by financial greed, about neighbors who had lost homes in the last crisis, about his own life, how doors had slammed shut because the world saw only his skin, his uniform, his supposed place. Now he held knowledge that could tear open their fortress of power. But at what cost? As the afternoon waned, Isaiah noticed something else. People were watching each other. Suspicion had become the new currency. Whispers spread who leaked what, who might talk. The paranoia was contagious. Everyone was a suspect. Everyone except him. Not one person looked twice at the janitor polishing the brass handles, or the man bending to empty their trash. He was the only person in the building no one suspected because to them he wasn't a person at all. And that was the moment Isaiah realized. His curse had become his shield. For the first time, invisibility was power. Isaiah sat in the janitor's closet that night, the hum of the fluorescent light above him filling the silence. His shift was nearly over, but he hadn't finished half his route. His mop leaned against the wall, forgotten. In his lap rested a scrap of paper he'd slipped into his pocket before tossing the rest of the trash. Just one page, a sliver of the document he'd seen. Numbers, company names, arrows drawn between accounts. It meant nothing to anyone else, but to him, it screamed. He stared at it until the numbers blurred. Then he folded it, slid it into his wallet, and pressed his palms against his knees. What am I doing? He wasn't an executive. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a janitor, replaceable, invisible, disposable. If anyone found out he'd seen this, they'd bury him before they let him bury them. He thought of his daughter, Kayla. 15, bright-eyed, full of questions he sometimes struggled to answer. Why don't you do something else, Dad? You're smart. You could be more than this. He had never told her about the job interviews that went nowhere, the doors that closed before he even walked in, the subtle ways people told him he didn't belong. He wanted her to believe he chose this work, that he wasn't crushed into it. If he got involved in this, what would it cost her? He could lose everything, his paycheck, his insurance, the tiny apartment they shared. Worse, he could put her in danger. Men like Richard Brandell didn't play fair. Isaiah rubbed his temples, willing the thoughts away. This isn't your fight. He'd spent his life being overlooked. Surviving meant staying quiet, head down, doing the job no one else wanted. That's how you stayed out of trouble. That's how you made it home every night. And yet, he couldn't shake the sound of Julia's voice in that conference room. We're talking federal charges. He couldn't unsee the folder, the way the CEO snapped his words like threats. He couldn't silence the truth he now carried. Damn it, he muttered, shoving the scrap of paper deeper into his wallet. The janitor's closet door creaked open. Darren poked his head in, his grin half playful, half prying. What, you hiding in here? Place ain't gonna clean itself. Isaiah forced a smile. Taking 5. Yeah, well, don't take too long, Darren said. Then, lowering his voice, word is, they're bringing in outside auditors. Something big's cooking upstairs. You'd hear anything? Isaiah shook his head, gripping his knees tighter. Just floors to mop. Darren lingered, squinting like he was trying to read Isaiah's silence. Finally, he shrugged and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Alone again, Isaiah exhaled slowly. He had a choice: do nothing and stay safe, or step forward and risk losing everything. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like the ceiling itself. For now, he told himself he would wait, keep silent, survive. But deep down in the pit of his stomach he knew the truth. Once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once you carry the truth, silence feels like betrayal. The next evening, Isaiah's supervisor intercepted him before he could wheel his cart into the lobby. "Read," the man grunted, clipboard in hand. "Change of assignment. You'll be handling the executive offices this week. Harrington's floor needs extra attention. Carpets, windows, the works." Isaiah blinked. He never got reassigned unless someone quit or called out. And Julia Harrington's office? That space was usually off limits, cleaned only when executives were gone. He nodded anyway, keeping his face neutral. Understood, but inside, tension coiled in his chest. Of all the places he wanted to avoid, it was her office, the same office where he'd overheard pieces of Brandl's midnight meeting. Now he was being sent straight into her territory. Julia Harrington's door was half open when he arrived later that night. The glow of her desk lamp spilled across the hallway. She was still there, of course. She was always there. Isaiah hesitated, then knocked lightly. Her voice was brisk. "Come in." She didn't look up when he entered. Papers were spread across her desk in careful rows, a pen moving quickly. She wore her navy suit jacket draped over her chair, sleeves of her blouse rolled up. Even at this hour, she radiated control. "Just cleaning," Isaiah said quietly, pushing his cart inside. "Fine," she replied, still not glancing at him. He moved silently, emptying her trash, dusting the shelves. But as he bent near the desk, he couldn't help but notice the documents she was reviewing weren't just routine reports. Charts, balances, transfers. The same kind of numbers he'd seen the night before. He caught himself staring a moment too long. "Something wrong?" Julia's voice cut through the air. Isaiah straightened quickly. "No, man. Just doing my job." Her eyes flicked up at him for the first time, sharp and assessing. For a second, he thought she might ask more, but she simply nodded, returning to her work. Still, the look lingered. Half an hour later, as Isaiah wiped the conference table outside her office, Julia emerged. She moved to the coffee machine, muttering under her breath when it sputtered. "Of course," she sighed, slapping the side of it. "The one thing in this building they won't replace." Isaiah watched, then set down his rag. "Try holding the button halfway down. It sticks." She froze, surprised by the interruption. Then, she tried it. The machine groaned, then poured a steady stream of coffee into her mug. Her eyes flicked toward him again, this time with the faintest trace of curiosity. "You've been here long enough to know the quirks of the appliances, I take it." He shrugged. "Long enough to notice what everyone else ignores." Something passed between them, brief, subtle, but real. Julia looked at him as though, for just a heartbeat, she actually saw him. Then it was gone. She turned back to her coffee. Well, good to know someone pays attention. She walked away and Isaiah returned to his cleaning. But his pulse still thudded in his ears. Later, as he finished vacuuming the hallway, Darren appeared, leaning casually against the wall. "You and Harrington in there chatting about coffee?" he teased, smirking. "Careful, man. Folks'll start thinking you're climbing the corporate ladder." Isaiah gave him a flat look. "Just fixing the machine." Darren chuckled, but his eyes searched Isaiah's face too long. "You've been acting differently, Red. Like you know something the rest of us don't." Isaiah felt the weight of the paper in his wallet, hidden but burning. He forced a small smile. "The only thing I know is that the floors don't clean themselves." Darren let it go for now, but the suspicion was there. When Isaiah finally left the 23rd floor that night, he couldn't shake the strange unease Julia's gaze had stirred. For years he had been invisible to her. Now, in one small exchange, that invisibility had flickered. It wasn't much. Barely a glance. But for a man who'd lived in the shadows, it was the beginning of something dangerous. By midweek, Brandl Co. felt less like a financial firm and more like a pressure cooker. Meetings doubled, tempers flared, and whispers chased through hallways like smoke. The tension was so thick, Isaiah could feel it vibrating through the floors he polished. Even the interns, usually bright-eyed and desperate to please, scurried past with pale faces and lowered voices. Isaiah had learned to blend into the chaos, mop in hand, carts squeaking softly behind him. But while the executives snapped at each other, he noticed details no one else cared to see. The shredded documents piling higher than usual, the late-night deliveries of files, the way Julia's office light burned caff, long past midnight. And he noticed the eyes. People were watching, not at him exactly, but at everyone. Suspicion had become contagious. Each partner eyed the other like a potential traitor. Each assistant glanced over their shoulder before making a copy. The whole building buzzed with paranoia. Isaiah should have been safe in his invisibility, but lately he felt the weight of Darren's gaze every time he walked by. That Thursday, as Isaiah wheeled his cart onto Julia's floor, he found her in the corridor, voice sharp as she scolded a junior analyst. "You don't send sensitive data over unsecured email," she snapped. "Do you understand what's at stake here? If one mistake gets out, this firm is finished." The analyst stammered an apology, clutching a stack of papers. Julia dismissed him with a flick of her hand and turned only to nearly collide with Isaiah rounding the corner. Her eyes narrowed. "You're here again?" "Assigned to this floor," Isaiah said evenly. She studied him for a beat, as though weighing something. "You're everywhere lately." Isaiah gripped the handle of his mop cart. "Floors don't clean themselves." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She brushed past him, heels clicking like gunfire. But the way she'd looked at him lingered, unsettling. Later that night, Isaiah worked quietly in the executive lounge when Darren strolled in, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Funny seeing you up here so much," Darren said, leaning against the doorway. "Guess they trust you more than most folks." Isaiah didn't look up. "Just following orders." Darren's voice dropped lower. "Thing is, Reed, people talk. They say Harrington's been spending a lot of late nights with papers that ain't meant to be seen. And you're always around. Makes me wonder what you're seeing that you're not supposed to." Isaiah set his rag down slowly. "What are you getting at, Darren?" The guard smirked, though his eyes were sharp. "Nothing. Just if you know something, best keep it locked up. Big dogs don't like it when the little guys sniff around." He left with a casual wave, but Isaiah's chest tightened. Darren's words were more than banter, they were a warning. By Friday, the storm reached Julia's office. Isaiah was vacuuming near her doorway when voices erupted inside. "This is spiraling, Richard." Julia's tone was controlled fury. "We can't keep covering this up." "The auditors will cruise." Brandl's voice cut her off, loud enough for Isaiah to hear clearly. "You're not here to worry, you're here to win. Remember your place." The silence that followed was jagged. Then the door burst open, and Brandl stormed out, brushing past Isaiah without a glance. Julia emerged seconds later, her face pale but composed. For the first time, she looked shaken. Her eyes landed on Isaiah briefly, as if she realized he'd heard everything. Their gazes locked hers sharp, questioning his steady but unreadable. Neither spoke. But in that silence, Isaiah understood something vital. Julia was caught in this web too. She wasn't just ambitious, she was trapped between her conscience and her career. And now she was beginning to notice the one man everyone else ignored. Isaiah's shift ended at 2 a.m. Most nights, he went straight home, collapsed on the worn couch in his small apartment, and let exhaustion drown out his thoughts. But that night, he sat at the kitchen table, unable to shake the weight pressing on his chest. The scrap of paper was still tucked inside his wallet. He set it on the table, smoothing its edges. Numbers stared back at him cold, precise, undeniable. He should have thrown it away days ago. Instead, it sat like a stone in his pocket, dragging his conscience deeper every hour. Kayla shuffled into the room, rubbing her eyes. She wore her oversized hoodie, sleeves swallowing her hands. "You're still up?" Isaiah forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep." "Go on, back to bed." But she sat across from him, studying his face. "You look like you're carrying the world, Dad." He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe just carrying too many floors." She smirked, but it faded quickly. "You know, I told Ms. Lopez at school that you work at Brandel. She said that's one of the biggest firms in the country. She asked what you do there, and when I said janitor, she looked at me like what?" Kayla hesitated, searching for words. Like it was something to be embarrassed about. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "There's no shame in honest work." "I know," Kayla said softly. "But you're smarter than anyone I know. Why are you just cleaning up after them instead of being one of them?" The question cut deeper than she realized. He remembered his younger self Isaiah read, fresh out of college, degree in hand. He had dreamed of numbers, of financial models, of a career in the same skyscrapers he now mopped. But interviews blurred into rejections. Some were polite, some blunt, some dressed in careful phrases like, "not the right fit." Once, a recruiter had looked at him at his dark skin, his plain suit, and they asked, "Are you sure you'd fit in with our clients?" He'd walked out of that building with fire in his chest, but fire alone didn't pay rent. Months turned to years, dreams thinned into survival, and eventually he took the janitor's uniform. Just one job to get by. One job, until something better came. But one job became a lifetime. He rubbed his temples, Kayla's words echoing like an old wound reopening. "Life doesn't always give you what you deserve, baby. Sometimes you just take what you can, and you keep moving." She frowned. "But you deserve more." Her conviction both lifted and crushed him. He wanted to believe it, but the world had spent decades convincing him otherwise. After she went back to bed, Isaiah sat in the dim kitchen, memories swirling. Professors who had told him he had a gift for numbers. Job fairs where recruiters smiled at white candidates and barely glanced at him. The slow erosion of confidence until he began to believe invisibility was safer than rejection. And now he held evidence that could take down the very kind of men who had dismissed him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He folded the paper again, sliding it back into his wallet. But this time, he didn't shove it deep. He left it near the edge, easy to reach. Because whether he admitted it or not, a part of him was done being invisible. The 23rd floor was nearly deserted by the time Isaiah reached it that night. Most lights were off, leaving only the faint glow from Julia Harrington's office. As usual, she was still there. He hesitated before pushing his cart down the hall. After the heated exchange with Brandel days earlier, something about Julia seemed different. Less untouchable. More brittle. When he knocked softly on her open door, she didn't snap this time. She just looked up, eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Oh," she said, voice flat. "It's you." "Carpet shampoo," Isaiah replied, lifting the hose attachment. "Won't be long." She nodded, returning to the papers spread across her desk. But as Isaiah worked, he noticed her hands lingered on the pages without writing, her pen unmoving. Her shoulders slumped ever so slightly. The hum of his machine filled the silence, steady and low. After a while, Julia set her pen down and spoke. "You ever wonder," she asked quietly, "if you've given up too much for this place?" Isaiah nearly dropped the hose. He glanced at her, surprised. "This place?" "The firm," she clarified. "The hours, the pressure, the way it consumes everything else. Some days I wonder if it's worth it." Isaiah studied her for a moment. "Depends what you think you're buying with the sacrifice." She looked at him, eyebrows lifting slightly. "And what do you think I'm buying?" He held her gaze, his tone calm. Validation, power, maybe a seat at their table. Her lips parted, as if she hadn't expected honesty from him. For once, she didn't mask her expression with indifference. "That obvious?" she murmured. Isaiah returned to the carpet, the machine buzzing. "Not obvious to them. They're too busy looking past people to notice much." The words hung heavy between them. Julia leaned back in her chair, studying him with an intensity that made him uneasy. For the first time, he felt less invisible under her eyes. After a pause, she stood, walked to the coffee machine in the corner, and frowned when it sputtered again. "Of course," she muttered. Isaiah set down the hose, walked over, and adjusted the button. The machine groaned, then released a steady stream. "You really do know all its tricks," Julia said, almost smiling. "Like I said," he replied, "I notice what others ignore." This time, her smile flickered for real small, tired, but genuine. She poured a second cup without asking and handed it to him. Isaiah hesitated, then accepted. The warmth of the mug in his hands felt strange, like he'd been invited somewhere he didn't belong. They stood in silence, sipping. For a moment, the roles of janitor and executive blurred. They were just two exhausted people sharing coffee in the quiet hours of a building that demanded too much from both of them. "Thank you," Julia said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me," she replied, almost to herself. Isaiah didn't answer, but her words struck deep. He was the one who had longed his entire life to be seen. And yet, tonight, in this fleeting exchange, he realized how starved she was for the same thing. The bond was fragile, delicate as glass but real. Monday morning brought a storm to Brandel Co. Not a storm of rainbow grey clouds did hang low over the city but of whispers and sharp voices. The firm had been hit with a surprise. A regulatory agency announced an unplanned audit. The timing was no coincidence. Someone, somewhere, had tipped them off. Isaiah learned this not from a formal announcement, but from the snippets of conversation that swirled through the lobby like smoke. Partners barked orders into phones, assistants rushed with files stacked high, and even the usually confident interns looked rattled. He mopped the floor in silence, but his ears caught every word. 2 weeks they'll tear everything apart. Brandel's furious. "I want everything scrubbed clean before auditors get near it. If this leaks outside, we're ruined." Scrubbed clean. Isaiah knew the phrase meant more than just documents. It meant erasing trails, silencing questions, burying the truth deeper. On the 23rd floor, the tension sharpened. Julia's office door slammed more than once that day. When Isaiah arrived for his shift that evening, she was already pacing, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand," she snapped. "But if we falsify those numbers again, it won't matter, we'll hang ourselves." She paused, listening. Her voice dropped. "Then you do it. I'm not taking the fall." She ended the call and leaned against her desk, breathing hard. When she finally noticed Isaiah entering with his cart, she straightened, mask snapping back into place. "Long night?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flickered. "You have no idea." Isaiah said nothing, but the weight between them deepened. She was in over her head, and she knew he could see it. Later, as Isaiah polished the hall, Darren appeared again. His grin was wide, but his tone was sharp. "Reed," Darren said, trapping a hand on his shoulder. "Busy man these days. Always up here near Harrington, huh?" Isaiah stiffened. "It's my assignment." "Sure it is." Darren leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Funny thing about assignments, though they can change, just like loyalties." Isaiah met his gaze. "If you're trying to say something, say it." Darren chuckled, releasing his grip. "Relax, brother, just keeping an eye out for you. Word is, the walls have ears these days. And if you're caught listening to the wrong thing," he tapped the side of his head, "could be bad for your health." He walked away whistling, leaving Isaiah with the echo of his warning. By midnight, Julia emerged from her office, files clutched to her chest. She stopped when she saw Isaiah vacuuming near the elevators. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" she asked suddenly. Isaiah turned off the machine. "Like what?" "Like you know something I don't." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the cracks in her composure. He hesitated, then said carefully, "I just notice what people try to hide." She studied him for a long moment, eyes narrowing. "Then you should be careful. Noticing too much in this building can get you crushed." Her words weren't a threat, they were a warning. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, Isaiah realized they were both trapped in the same machine, one fighting to survive at the bottom, the other at the top. But the machine didn't care. It would devour them both if it had to. It was well past midnight when Isaiah finished wiping down the glass walls of the conference room. The rest of the floor was silent, except for the faint sound of Julia's voice drifting from her office. He considered ignoring it, but something in her tone-tired, unguarded made him pause. "Dad, please," she was saying softly. "I can't come this weekend. I don't have the time." A pause. Then her voice cracked, just slightly. "I know. I miss you too, but if I step away now, everything I've worked for could collapse." Another pause, longer this time. Her breath hitched. "Don't say that. Don't—" The words cut off. Silence followed, heavy and sharp. Isaiah quietly returned to his cart, giving her privacy. But minutes later, Julia appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You heard," she said flatly. Isaiah hesitated, didn't mean to. Her lips pressed together. For a long moment, she looked like she might retreat. Then, almost against her own will, she stepped into the conference room. "My father's sick," she said, her voice lower. "Stage 4. The doctors give him months, maybe less." Isaiah's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." She crossed her arms, staring at the polished table. "I should be with him, but instead, I'm here chained to this place. If I walk away now, I lose everything I've sacrificed for. All the years, the nights, the relationships I burned to get this far, it'll mean nothing." Her jaw clenched, and for the first time, Isaiah saw the cracks in her perfection. "I spent my whole life proving I belong here, that I'm strong enough, ruthless enough, smart enough. If I step back, they'll say it's because I'm weak, because I couldn't handle the fire." Her eyes flicked up, meeting his. "You know what it's like to be dismissed, to be told you don't belong, don't you?" Isaiah felt the question cut straight through him. He nodded slowly. "Every day." Julia exhaled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Then you understand why I can't leave, why I can't show them a crack, even when my world is falling apart." For a moment, silence hung between them. Two people from opposite sides of the building, bound by the same wound, the desperate need to be seen in a place determined to erase them. Isaiah finally spoke. "Being invisible doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it's the only way to survive." Julia looked at him, something unspoken passing in her eyes. For the first time, she didn't seem like the untouchable executive. She seemed human. And in that moment, Isaiah realized the storm wasn't just about corruption or audits. It was about two people carrying ghosts too heavy to bear alone. The next evening, Isaiah found himself repairing the same stubborn coffee machine again. This time, Julia stood nearby with her arms crossed, watching. "You make it look easy," she said, as he nudged the button and coaxed the machine back to life. "Years of practice," Isaiah replied, faintly amused. "This thing and we've got history." Julia tilted her head. "You realize you're more valuable to this office than half the analysts, right? If this machine dies, I think the entire floor collapses." Isaiah chuckled softly, a sound she clearly wasn't used to hearing from him. "Guess I've been holding the place together all along." Her lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile. "Don't let Brandel hear that. He'll have you running the firm by next week." It was a joke, small, simple, but it cracked the wall of tension between them. For the first time, their words carried something lighter than suspicion. Later that night, as Isaiah wiped down the glass doors, Julia emerged from her office carrying a stack of folders. She hesitated, then placed them on his cart instead of carrying them herself. "Could you throw these in the shred bin?" she asked. "They're duplicates." Isaiah glanced at her. "You trust me with that?" Julia's gaze lingered on him. "I trust you more than most people here." The words surprised them both. She looked away quickly, but the admission hung in the air. Around midnight, they shared another cup of coffee, this time, not by accident. Julia poured two without asking, handed him one, and leaned against the counter beside him. "Tell me something," she said. "If you weren't doing Nissa, what would you be doing?" Isaiah sipped, considering. "Numbers, finance. I used to think I'd work in a place like this, only on the other side of the glass." Julia studied him, eyebrows raised. "You studied finance?" Economics, Isaiah corrected. Graduated top of my class, interviewed at firms downtown, didn't get far. Her expression shifted surprise, then a flicker of guilt. So you know as much as half the men upstairs. Maybe more, Isaiah said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. She laughed softly, the sound startling even herself. You might be right. For a moment they simply stood together, sipping coffee, two people sharing pieces of themselves they rarely revealed. As Isaiah finished his shift, Julia walked him to the elevator, a gesture that shocked him more than anything else. No executive ever escorted a janitor anywhere. Upper doors, she said. Thank you. For not just the floors, for listening. Isaiah nodded, meeting her gaze. Everyone needs to be seen, Julia. Her name on his lips hung in the air, intimate, startling, but instead of correcting him, she simply nodded. When the elevator doors closed, Isaiah leaned against the wall, heart thudding. The walls between them were crumbling, piece by piece. And, though he knew the danger of being seen, a part of him no longer wanted to disappear. Friday evening, the building pulsed with frantic energy. Executives barked orders into phones, interns sprinted with armfuls of binders, and the air carried a sharp scent of sweat and stress. The auditors had arrived earlier than expected. Isaiah moved quietly through the chaos, mop in hand, cart trailing behind. He kept his head down, but inside his pulse thundered. The secret in his wallet, the paper he hadn't yet destroyed, felt heavier than ever. He told himself he'd stay invisible, as always, but invisibility was no longer safe. Near midnight, as Isaiah polished the corridor outside Julia's office, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open, and Richard Brandel himself stormed out. His face was tight, his movements sharp. He entered Julia's office without knocking. Isaiah froze, mop in hand, as their voices erupted. You promised me loyalty, Brandel snarled. And now auditors are circling like vultures. Someone inside fed them. Julia's voice rose in protest. It wasn't me. I've done everything you asked, everything. But if you keep burying numbers, we're finished. Don't you dare lecture me, Brandel hissed. You wouldn't have your career without me. Remember that. Silence followed, then the sound of papers slamming onto her desk. Isaiah stepped closer, unable to stop himself. Through the crack in the door, he saw Julia standing rigid, Brandel towering over her. Then Brandel's voice dropped, low and venomous. If you cross me, Harrington, you'll go down with the rest of them. And no one, not your father, not anyone will care. He stormed out seconds later, brushing past Isaiah without noticing. Isaiah slipped quickly down the hall, heart hammering. But Julia had seen him, he knew it by the flash of her eyes as she stepped into the corridor. Later that night, as Isaiah emptied the shred bins, Darren called at him in the lounge. You're playing a dangerous game, Reed, Darren said, his grin sharp. I saw you hovering outside Harrington's office. You think nobody notices you, but I do. Isaiah stiffened. I was working. Sure you were. Darren leaned closer, lowering his voice. Word is, Brandel's hunting for a leak. If he decides it's you, well, you won't be polishing floors anymore. You'll be lucky to walk out of here at all. Isaiah's blood ran cold. I haven't said a word. Darren smirked. Maybe, but I know you've been listening. And maybe you've been keeping things you shouldn't. Paper, maybe? Isaiah's chest tightened. Did Darren know? Or was he fishing? Either way, it was too close. By the time Isaiah wheeled his cart back to the janitor's closet, his hands were trembling. He pulled the wallet from his pocket, staring at the folded scrap of evidence. He should burn it. Destroy it. Pretend he'd never seen it. But just as he reached for the lighter in the drawer, footsteps echoed behind him. He spun, and there she was. Julia. Her face was pale, eyes sharp. You have something, don't you? She asked quietly. Isaiah froze. What are you talking about? Don't lie to me. She stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. I saw the way you look at the numbers. You understand them. You've been watching. You know. Isaiah's throat went dry. He wanted to deny it, but her eyes, fierce and searching, cut through him. Yes, he finally admitted. I know. For a heartbeat, relief flickered across her face. Then something darker settled in. You shouldn't, she whispered. And before Isaiah could answer, Darren appeared in the doorway behind her. His grin was wide, his tone triumphant. Well, well, Darren drawled. Looks like our invisible man isn't so invisible after all. Isaiah's stomach dropped. The secret was no longer safe. He was no longer unseen. The janitor's closet felt smaller than ever, its shelves closing in around Isaiah as Darren's grin stretched across the doorway. Julia stood frozen between them, her eyes darting from one man to the other. Well? Darren said, rocking back on his heels. Gonna hand over whatever you've been hiding, Reed? Or do I tell Brandel our little janitor's been snooping in places he doesn't belong? Isaiah's pulse thundered. I don't know what you're talking about. Darren's grin didn't falter. Don't play me. I've been watching you. You think you can walk these halls unseen, but I see you. Always scribbling, always listening. You think I don't know what you've got tucked in that wallet? Isaiah's hand instinctively brushed his pocket. Too late. Darren's eyes gleamed. Julia finally spoke, her voice sharp. Enough, Darren. If you have a problem, take it to Brandel directly. Oh, I will, Darren said smoothly. But maybe I don't have to if our friend here cooperates. Isaiah stared at him, the weight of years pressing down on his chest. He had survived by being invisible. But invisibility was gone now. Hours later, Isaiah sat alone in his apartment. Kayla slept in the next room, her breathing soft and even. On the table before him lay the folded scrap of paper, illuminated by the weak glow of a lamp. He unfolded it again, eyes tracing the damning numbers. Transfers, shell accounts, falsified balances, the kind of evidence that could sink Brandel Co. His hand trembled as he held the lighter above the page. One flick, and it would all be over. He could vanish back into the shadows, let the powerful devour each other while he scrubbed their floors. The Kayla's words echoed in his mind. You deserve more. For the first time in years, he wondered if she was right. Meanwhile, on the 23rd floor, Julia sat at her desk, staring at the phone. She'd just ended another call with her father. His voice had been weak, but hopeful. I'll see you soon, honey, he whispered. But she didn't know if she could keep that promise. The walls of her office seemed to close in. The audit loomed closer. Brandel's threats rang in her ears. And now the janitor, Isaiah Reed. He was dangerous, not because he wanted power, but because he saw too much. And yet, in her gut, she knew he wasn't her enemy. Still, if he fell, she would be dragged down with him. She pressed her hands to her face, fighting the urge to scream. For years, she had built her armor out of steel. Tonight, it felt like paper. Back in the lobby, Darren leaned against his post, eyes scanning the cameras. He whistled softly, smug. Got you now, Reed, he muttered. He didn't know what Isaiah would do with the evidence, but he knew one thing. Whether the janitor burned it or kept it, Darren had leverage. And leverage was power. He planned to cash it in soon. The next morning, Isaiah returned to the firm. He pushed his cart into the gleaming lobby, head bowed, movements steady. To the passing executives, nothing seemed different. Just the janitor, invisible as always. But inside, Isaiah felt the crushing weight of choice. If he acted, he risked losing everything. His job, his safety, even his daughter's stability. If he stayed silent, the truth would rot inside him, just like it had for years. For the first time in his life, invisibility was no longer an option. Saturday evening, the building was quieter than usual. Most executives had fled for the weekend, but the night crew remained janitors, maintenance, security. The forgotten heartbeat of the skyscraper. Isaiah moved through the empty lobby, mop gliding across marble that gleamed like a mirror. His thoughts were heavy, circling the same impossible choice. Expose the truth and risk everything, or bury it and return to invisibility. Man, you look like the world's sitting on your shoulders, said a voice behind him. Isaiah turned to see Mrs. Carter, the elderly night cleaner who handled the upper floors when he couldn't. Her back was bent, her steps slow, but her eyes sharp and knowing saw more than most. "Evening, Mrs. C," Isaiah said quietly. She set her bucket down with a groan and leaned on the handle. "I've been here 35 years. Seen suits come and go, fortunes rise and fall. You think these marble walls care who's rich today and broke tomorrow? They don't." Isaiah offered a faint smile. "Maybe not, but the people inside care plenty." Mrs. Carter chuckled. "Of course they do. That's why they're miserable." She studied him, her gaze narrowing. "But you're different lately. Less invisible." Isaiah stiffened. "What do you mean? You used to walk through here like a shadow. Now, you walk like a man carrying a secret." His throat tightened. "Maybe I am." Mrs. Carter stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Secrets are heavy, son. You hold on to one too long, it breaks your back. But share it with the right person, it can set you free." Isaiah stared at her, surprised by the weight of her words. "And if the truth destroys everything?" She tilted her head. "Maybe it needs destroying." Later, Isaiah and Mrs. Carter sat in the break room, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence. She sipped her tea from a chipped mug, eyes steady on him. "You remind me of my brother," she said softly. "Smart as a whip, but he worked himself to the bone in a factory. Had ideas that could have changed everything, but he never spoke up, said it wasn't his place." "What happened?" Isaiah asked. "He died with those ideas in his head, and the world never knew what it lost." Isaiah looked down at his hands, calloused from years of scrubbing. The paper in his wallet burned against his pocket. Mrs. Carter reached across the table, her wrinkled hand covering his. "Don't let them convince you your voice doesn't matter. Sometimes the smallest voice can echo the loudest if it speaks at the right time." Her words pierced him deeper than any warning Darren had thrown his way. That night, as Isaiah walked Kayla home from her friend's house, she chatted about school projects and college applications. He listened, nodding, but his mind was elsewhere. Mrs. Carter's voice rang in his ears. "Secrets are heavy, son, maybe it needs destroying." When Kayla grabbed his hand and smiled up at him, Isaiah felt the weight shift. For the first time, he saw not just what he stood to lose but what he might give her if he chose to fight. Hope. Sunday morning, the city outside Isaiah's apartment was slow and grey. Rain tapped gently against the window, streaking the glass in crooked lines. Kayla still slept, curled under a blanket on the couch. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded scrap of paper. He had unfolded and refolded it so many times the edges had begun to fray. The numbers stared back, quiet but merciless. He rubbed his temples, exhausted. For years, he had convinced himself that invisibility was safe. If no one saw him, no one could hurt him. He had built his life around silence, around surviving one day at a time. But silence hadn't kept him safe. Not really. It had only buried him. He thought back to college, to the fire he once carried. Long nights spent solving equations for the thrill of discovery, professors telling him he had a gift. He dreamed of skyscrapers back then not as places to scrub floors, but as places where his ideas would matter. And yet, when rejection piled on rejection, he had let that fire dim. Not the right fit. Our clients wouldn't relate. We'll keep your resume on file. Each no had been a stone, weighing him down until he stopped climbing altogether. He told himself it was easier to disappear than to keep fighting a wall that refused to break. But was it easier? He thought of Taylor's face when she asked why he wasn't one of them. He thought of Mrs. Carter's words, "Maybe it needs destroying." His flaw wasn't just invisibility, it was fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being crushed, fear of proving them right. If he stayed silent now, he would be passing that fear on to Kayla, teaching her to bow her head, to accept less than she deserved. And that, Isaiah realized, was something he could not bear. That evening, he returned to the firm for his shift. The lobby gleamed as always, the same marble he had polished 1,000 times. But tonight, he saw it differently. Each stroke of his mop reflected a truth. He had been here all along, holding this place together, unseen. Invisible but essential. He paused at the glass doors, his reflection staring back at him. For the first time, he didn't look like just a janitor. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a choice. And this time, he wasn't going to run from it. Later, as Julia passed him in the hallway, she slowed. Their eyes met. "You look different," she said quietly. Isaiah's lips curved faintly. "Maybe I am." She studied him, as though trying to read what had shifted. Then, almost reluctantly, she nodded. Neither of them spoke further, but something had changed. Isaiah wasn't hiding anymore. And Julia knew it. Monday night, the building hummed with tension. The auditors had expanded their review, and whispers of scandal floated through the corridors like smoke. Executives snapped at assistants, phones rang unanswered, and the air smelled faintly of fear. Isaiah pushed his cart down the hall, mop swaying in rhythm. But tonight, his steps felt heavier. Not from dread, though, it lingered, but from resolve. He paused outside Julia's office. Light spilled from the crack under her door. She was still here, working late, as always. For a long moment, Isaiah stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at him to move on, to stay invisible, to protect himself and Kayla. But then he thought of Mrs. Carter's words. He thought of Kayla's hopeful smile. And he thought of the fire he once carried, the one that had never truly died. He knocked. "Come in," Julia called, her voice tired. Isaiah stepped inside. She sat behind her desk, papers strewn across its surface like fallen leaves. Her shoulders sagged, but her eyes sharpened when they met his. "Isaiah," she said slowly, "what are you doing here?" He swallowed hard. "I need to show you something." Her brow furrowed. "What is it?" He pulled the folded scrap from his wallet and set it on her desk. The numbers glared up at them both, stark and undeniable. Julia's face was drained of color. She reached for the page with trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" "I found it, weeks ago. I should have destroyed it, but I couldn't." His voice cracked. "I couldn't keep pretending I don't see what's right in front of me." Julia stared at the page, then at him. "Do you realize what this means? If Brandel finds out you've been holding this crease—" "I know," Isaiah said firmly, "but I can't stay invisible anymore." Silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Julia set the paper down carefully, as though it might shatter. Her eyes searched his face, as if trying to decide whether to trust him or fear him. "You're putting both of us at risk," she whispered. Isaiah nodded. "I know, but you're already at risk, Julia. He's dragging you down with him, and I don't want to watch that happen. Not to you, not to anyone." Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, she saw him not as a shadow in the hallways, but as a man standing in the light, risking everything, and she couldn't look away. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady. "If we do this, there's no going back." Isaiah held her gaze. "Then we don't go back." The weight of his words hung between them, dangerous and fragile. Julia leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Then, to his shock, she smiled faintly sad, but real. "You're braver than half the men upstairs," Isaiah read. He didn't answer. He only felt the strange, electric sense that for the first time in years he was truly alive. The next night, the office felt different. The usual chatter of keyboards and clipped phone calls was replaced by uneasy murmurs. The auditors had requested a second round of files, and panic rippled like electricity through the upper floors. Isaiah wheeled his cart past clusters of anxious employees. Their words tumbled over each other: embezzlement, liabilities, cover up. He kept his head low, but inside he carried a secret. He wasn't just cleaning up their messes anymore. He was part of something bigger. Around midnight, Julia found him in the staff lounge. She looked tired, but softer somehow. Her polished armor cracked just enough to reveal the woman inside. She carried 2 cups of coffee. Peace offering, she said, setting one on the table. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. From the enemy? Her lips twitched. Temporary truce. He accepted the cup, warmth seeping into his hands. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, this time it was almost companionable. Finally, Julia broke it. I read through those numbers again. You were right not to destroy them. Isaiah met her gaze. I was scared. You still are, she said gently. He chuckled, shaking his head. You're not wrong. Then, almost to his own surprise, he added, but fear doesn't have to mean silence. Julia studied him. For the first time, she smiled genuine, unguarded. I think you might be the bravest man in this building. Later, as they walked the quiet hallways together, Julia shared something she rarely admitted. When my father got sick, I thought climbing higher here would prove something that I could hold everything together. But the higher I went, the more I lost myself. She glanced at him. Funny how the one person who sees me is the one I never noticed. Isaiah's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, but words failed. Instead, he held her gaze, steady and unflinching. And that was enough. As dawn began to tint the city skyline, Julia stood beside Isaiah at the glass doors. The building reflected them, both executive and janitor, no longer strangers, but allies. We're not finished, Julia said quietly. The storm's coming. Brandel won't go down without a fight. Isaiah nodded. Then, we fight. Something unspoken passed between them, a fragile hope, small but undeniable. For the first time, Isaiah didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. And in that recognition, he saw Julia too, not just the ambitious executive, but a woman carrying her own wounds, standing beside him in the light. The next day, the building was a pressure cooker. Brandel had discovered discrepancies in the auditor's reports, and was furious. His office became a storm, phones slamming, assistants scurrying, and Julia caught in the eye of it all. Isaiah moved quietly through the lobby, mop in hand, sensing the tension like an electric current. Every stat felt heavier, not just because of the cleaning cart, but because the final hurdle loomed ahead. Brandel's wrath. In the executive suite, Brandel barked orders to everyone in sight. Julia sat across from him, eyes hard but steady, while Darren leaned against the wall, a smug expression plastered across his face. I want names, Brandel growled. Someone leaked this, and it ends tonight. No excuses. Darren smirked, glancing toward Isaiah, who just happened to be moving past the office, mop swinging rhythmically. You think you're clever, Reed? Darren hissed under his breath as he passed. One wrong move, and it's over. You'll regret ever stepping out of the shadows. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He had a choice: back down, stay invisible, and save himself, or face Brandel and risk everything to protect the truth. Later, in a deserted conference room, Julia whispered urgently, If Brandel discovers you holding that evidence, we're both finished, she said. Isaiah met her gaze. We can't hide it anymore. Not after everything we've seen. Not after everything he's done. Julia hesitated, fear flashing across her face. But then, slowly, she nodded. Then we do it together. One last stand. The clock ticked closer to midnight. Isaiah and Julia worked in tandem, assembling the evidence, preparing a plan to present it to the auditors and the authorities. Every noise, the hum of computers, the distant footsteps felt amplified, a reminder that any misstep could ruin them both. Darren lingered near the elevators, suspicious and threatening, while Brandel's fury simmered just out of sight. Are you sure about this? Julia asked, her hand brushing against Isaiah's as they reached for the same folder. Isaiah nodded, eyes unwavering. I spent my whole life invisible. Tonight, I'm not. Her lips pressed together, a mix of fear and admiration. Then, let's end it. The moment of truth was near. The evidence, painstakingly compiled and cross-referenced, could either topple Brandel or put Isaiah and Julia directly in the line of fire. One last decision, one final push against fear, secrecy, and the towering walls of power stood between them and justice. And as Isaiah adjusted his grip on the folder, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Julia was beside him. Together, they were ready to face the storm. The boardroom was cold, lit by fluorescent lights that bleached the mahogany table of warmth. Auditors sat stiffly, briefcases at their feet, pens poised. Brandel entered last, his presence filling the room like smoke. Darren shadowed him, eager and watchful. Isaiah lingered by the door, cart parked outside, mop propped against the wall. To the untrained eye, he was still the janitor, but in his jacket pocket, the evidence pulsed like a heartbeat. Julia met his eyes across the room. She gave the faintest nod. This was it. Brandel opened with a roar. This firm is built on excellence. Anyone suggesting otherwise is either incompetent or disloyal. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Julia. And disloyalty will be crushed. The auditors shifted uncomfortably. Papers shuffled. Julia rose slowly. Then, perhaps you should explain these, she said, sliding a folder onto the table. Brandel froze. Darren leaned forward, eyes narrowing. One of the auditors opened the folder, scanning. His brows knit tighter with each page. Another auditor leaned over, whispering urgently. This isn't, Brandel began. But his words faltered as Isaiah stepped forward, leaving his cart behind. I can explain, Isaiah said, voice steady, clear. Every head turned. For once, no one looked past him. Isaiah placed his own folded scrap of paper on the table. I found this weeks ago, hidden in the trash. It didn't add up. So I compared it with what I've seen cleaning these halls' files left out, numbers scribbled, transfers noted. It's all connected. The money, the lies, the shells. Brandel's face twisted. You dare? He thundered. Isaiah met his gaze. You've built this empire on shadows, but shadows disappear when the light shines. For a moment, silence. Then the lead auditor spoke. This corroborates what we've suspected. He looked at Isaiah, then Julia. This may be enough to open a full federal case. Brandel slammed a fist onto the table. You'll regret this, both of you. But his words rang hollow. The balance had shifted. Darren tried to recover the moment, sneering. You going to trust a janitor? A nobody? Isaiah turned to him, calm and resolute. Maybe I was nobody to you, but I've been here all along, watching, listening, cleaning up your messes, and tonight I chose not to stay silent. The room buzzed with whispers. Executives glanced nervously at each other. The auditors scribbled furiously. Julia stood taller, the weight of her silence lifted at last. As Brandel stormed out, barking threats to his lawyer over the phone, Isaiah felt something inside him shift. The fear that had chained him for years loosened. He was no longer invisible. Julia approached, eyes bright, voice low enough only for him to hear. You did it. Isaiah shook his head softly. We did. And in that moment, surrounded by chaos, betrayal, and the fall of giants, something fragile but undeniable sparked between them. Victory, yes, but also connection. The boardroom was silent except for the sound of papers sliding across the polished oak table. The auditors stared down at the evidence Isaiah and Julia had assembled, numbers, transfers, documents Brandel thought buried forever. Brandel's face turned crimson as the lead auditor spoke. These records are clear. You falsified millions. We'll be forwarding this to the SEC and state prosecutors immediately. No, Brandel snarled, rising from his chair. You can't take the word of a janitor. That janitor, the auditor cut in coldly, just saved this firm from collapse. Without his diligence, we might never have uncovered the truth. Gasps rippled through the room. Executives who'd ignored Isaiah for years turned to look at him, not through him, not past him but at him. Darren tried to protest, but Julia's sharp voice cut him down. You've been covering for Brandel. The cameras don't lie. You were watching Isaiah because you knew he could see what you were afraid to face. Darren stammered, but the security chief had already stepped forward, leading him and Brandel out under the stunned eyes of the board. When the dust settled, Julia turned to Isaiah. For the first time, there was no barrier between them, no title, no desk, no invisible line. Just two people who had faced the storm together and survived. You saved us, she said softly. Isaiah shook his head. We saved each other. Her smile was faint, but radiant. What will you do now? Isaiah looked around the room, the place that had defined so many of his years. He thought of Kayla, of Mrs. Carter, of every night he'd scrubbed floors unnoticed. I think, he said, steady and sure, it's time I stopped being invisible. Weeks later, Isaiah stood not with a mop, but with a stack of resumes in his hand. Julia had written his recommendation herself. The firm's new leadership grateful, Hambeld had offered him a role in compliance. Kayla was there when he signed the papers, her eyes bright with pride. I knew you'd do it, Dad. And Mrs. Carter, leaning on her mop, whispered with a knowing smile, Told you, son, secrets set free have power. That night, Isaiah walked through the lobby one last time as janitor. The marble floors gleamed under the lights, reflecting his steps. But this time, he didn't feel like a shadow. He felt seen. The man who had been dismissed as invisible had become the one who changed everything. Isaiah's journey closes with belonging, redemption, and hope for himself, Julia, Kayla, and everyone who ever felt unseen. Isaiah was ignored until the day his courage changed everything. But here's the question I want to leave you with. If someone like Isaiah worked in your office, would you have noticed him or walked past him like everyone else? Be honest, what would you have done?
Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this one, then you'll absolutely love the next. It's even crazier and more captivating than you can imagine. So go ahead and click the video showing right here on your screen, and I'll see you in the next story.